and looking forward to our study here in Mark 16. Be turning, if you'd like, to Mark 16, and we're going to pick up there. We were in Mark's Gospel a couple of weeks ago. We had our time with Brother Waters last week, so we took a short break from Mark, but we're back this morning here in Mark chapter 16. Getting towards the very end of the Gospel. The crucifixion has occurred already, and now we have seen Jesus buried. We'll find in chapter 16 what happens next. In many ways, the climax, the ultimate point of the Gospel. Before we get any further in, we'll go to God in prayer. Let's bow together. Holy God, we're thankful for the time you've given, for the day that we have, the opportunity to worship that we can enjoy together. We're grateful for all those who are here today, the blessing that we have of one another, the tremendous benefit that your word provides, not only in showing us a wise way to live among each other and among the world, but because it truly does contain the words of life. We're grateful that we can be saved by Christ through what we can believe and know about him. We pray this morning as we study that we would be impressed with your power and what you have worked through him, the great things that you have done to assure us of the life that we can have. Please be with all those who are here today. Help each of us in our various struggles and needs. Strengthen us for what might lie ahead. Prepare us and equip us to do your will while we're here. We're grateful for this time together today and ask that you would be with us. We pray in Christ's name. Amen. All right, at the end of Mark 15, we saw Mark kind of leaving us with these women who were observing where Jesus had been buried. The same women who he introduced earlier. We're back in verse 40 of chapter 15, who were looking from afar off as Jesus was crucified. Some of these really kind of last witnesses left from among the disciples, at least. Who knows what has become of the men, and that'll be kind of a theme we see here in chapter 16 as well. From other Gospels, we could cobble together that John seems to have returned to the cross. Maybe some others had, but for the most part, and as far as Mark is concerned, really they're nowhere to be seen. But we have these women who have been looking on and observing and kind of paying attention, taking note of everything that has happened and where all of those things have happened. And so they've keenly observed where the tomb of Jesus is. And now chapter 16 is going to tell us in the in the light of morning. They're not mistakenly stumbling through various tombs at night or anything. They're waiting until the Sabbath morning, until Sunday morning, and are going to go and visit the tomb of Jesus. This is a pretty short passage we're dealing with first here. Let's just read together Mark 16. We will read the first 8 verses. Now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices, that they might come and anoint him. Very early in the morning, on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And they said among themselves, "Who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us?" But when they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, for it was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a long white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He's not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going before you into Galilee. There you will see him, as he said to you." So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Well, as we see the women coming to the tomb here in verse 1, why are they coming there to anoint him. Kind of an interesting thing there in verse 1. And it'll be kind of a mini theme. We see a couple of things maybe that address this point or that kind of open up this perspective to us. Again, in Mark's gospel, it isn't necessarily mentioned, but we would find things associated with it, like in verse 46 of chapter 15. And you'd see from the other gospel accounts, I think John's account actually mentions in chapter 19 when Joseph and Nicodemus with him take the body of Jesus, that when they were burying him, so a couple of days ago by now, and we talk about 3 days, I'll mention some more of that in a moment. It hasn't been probably a lot more than, 30 hours or something like that. But when they first buried the body of Jesus, they wrapped it and they anointed it then. They had done all of the, taken all of the normal precautions that you would associate with burial for those people in that culture. They weren't embalming the body, and the Jews didn't practice that. Any anointing or any substances that they added during the wrapping, the shrouding and burial process would be primarily just to ward off the smell of decay that would come from out of that cave, that would come from out of that cleft in the rock. They weren't doing anything to preserve tissue. They weren't doing anything to preserve the body. It was purely for the sake of passers-by, essentially. But they've already done that, and presumably the women know that they have done that. Again, the women are pictured as being sort of a part of this process, especially back there in John's gospel, that they've been attendant to all of this. And yet here they are in verse 1, bringing spices, bringing what might be added, myrrh maybe, to anoint Jesus. Your mind may vary on this, I'm not sure, and I don't know that it's of key significance. But this seems to be in keeping with what we've seen from some women before in Mark's gospel, a measure of some sort of devotion, of some sort of honor, that here in this last instance, them maybe not perceiving, not knowing what is going to happen. Obviously, their minds are a little hazy, I suppose, on the idea or the fact of the resurrection. This will probably be the last time we're visiting this place. The body's going to start decaying pretty soon. We won't be coming back here every week to do something. Here we'll show this last sign of respect, this last show of worship for Jesus. We'll anoint his body. We'll offer this final act of devotion, and then we'll be done. That seems to be the spirit in which they are coming. And yet, and here's the sort of theme that we see played out a couple of times, that is rendered unnecessary. Jesus has said earlier, back in chapter 14, when he was anointed by the unnamed woman, maybe we assume to be Mary, the sister of Lazarus, she's anointed me for my burial. That had been done in advance. That had been done as there, again, a sort of extravagant show of love and devotion to Jesus. But he says, she's anointed me for my burial. She's taken care of that. The need to kind of ward off the smell of decay is not going to be necessary in this case. The need to shelter people or to kind of seal people off from the unpleasantness of death is not going to be necessary in this case. Because, as we shortly discover, of course, there's not a body there. The Lord did not allow his Holy One to see corruption. Jesus is no longer in the tomb, and so his body does not need to be anointed with any spices, does not need to have anything added to it to make it any more appealing as it lies in death, as it lies in repose. He is risen. He is no longer there. Well, a kind of similar idea in verse 2 with the conversation that the women are having, in verse 3. They've got another problem that they're kind of working through. Well, These stones are huge. I don't know the weight. I forgot to look and remind myself of how much one of these covering stones might typically weigh. But it's huge. It's a boulder. It's disc-shaped, big, thick circle that you would roll, and maybe there'd be furrows in the ground to make it a little bit easier to get in place. But that's not going to make it any easier to get out of place. And they're saying to themselves, I mean, we didn't bring anybody with a strong back. It kind of asks the question again, where are any of the men who might have been able to help them with this? James and John are probably pretty strong guys, living a life of manual labor up to this point, but we don't know where they are. And so the women are asking, well, we're going to need some help with this. We're going to have to recruit someone there, I guess. Maybe in the garden we'll find someone who can help, but we need help moving the stone. But once again, we find out when they get there, it's unnecessary. You don't need to move the stone. The stone's already been moved. That's already been taken care of. So we're getting an idea already that the things that we might worry about in death are not things that we'll need to be worried about in death where Jesus is concerned. They are things that God has already seen to, or that God has made obsolete, that he has just removed as concerns. And this, of course, is the great idea of resurrection. That all the answers are provided, that all the needs are met, that all of the old worries and concerns and fears are no longer applicable. They just don't fit into this situation. You don't need to come anoint this body. You don't need to roll the stone away yourself. You don't need to come and see what's going on there, because that tomb it's served its purpose. It's used. He was there for 3 days, but now he's not anymore. And so you can look for him elsewhere, you can find him elsewhere, and you can see and enjoy and be with him elsewhere. Tim?
Is it possible they thought that since there were soldiers supposed to be guarding the place, maybe the soldiers removed?
That could be. And yeah, and elsewhere we do see when they initially perceive that he's not there, they begin to ask the men, maybe ask the angels, what'd you do with him? Where, they seem maybe angry or upset in that case of saying, we came to do whatever they were intending to do for him, and his body isn't here. Where have you moved him? He's obviously somewhere. Bodies don't just disappear. So where is he? Maybe would suspect the soldiers of foul play, and maybe that question there in verse 3, maybe they're thinking these guys don't want us to, and so we need someone to convince them to be able to do it, or maybe they'll be able to help since if we can tell them what we want to do, but yeah, could be a thought there. Anything else to mention up through verse 3 or so? So working our way through it. So they come to the spot and see in verse 4, again, already this concern that they had is not a concern that applies anymore. This very large stone has already been moved, and so they walk inside to see what's going on. They've already met with something that they weren't expecting, and if nothing else, curiosity brings them further in to find out what is the matter, what's going on. And this also gives us a little indication as to the size of this tomb, or this cave is probably how we'd think of it. We mentioned it a few weeks ago. The examples we have, or maybe the prescriptions, later codified prescriptions for what this chamber would be like, is a 6x9 area, pretty good sized carving that's been made into the rock with a sort of shelf-like area for the body to be laid. But it's a decent-sized chamber that they're going into, enough for both of the women to come in and to see another man in there sitting. So it's not just a little cubby hole that they're peering into, but they go in and see someone. And right away we see, I already referred to him as an angel, and that seems to be the indication Mark is trying to get across. You have 3 markers there that are pretty common for an encounter with an angel. He's described as a young man. That often is how they will be called, especially when you read through the Old Testament. When an angel or the angel of the Lord appears, it's oftentimes, the Bible will just say a man or a young man. And he's wearing this white clothing, and the women are alarmed or afraid when they see him, which is maybe the most telltale giveaway that this is not a normal human encounter. Every single time an angel shows up, somebody is unsettled by it at least. They're afraid, they're alarmed. And he uses a pretty strong word, one of Mark's favorite words, to talk about their alarm and seeing him there in verses 5 and 6. With a little detail of him sitting on the right side that doesn't seem to have any real purpose other than that it sounds like the kind of details people recall when they're telling you a story. We sometimes throw in those details that seem kind of insignificant. Some of us who take a very long time to tell a story give way too many of those details. You've had one of those people trying to tell you about something they saw, and you're saying, just tell me, get to the point. I don't care what shirt he was wearing. I don't care who was sitting next to you. Just tell me what actually happened. But it does have that feeling of a real remembrance of them saying, yeah, we came in, and right there on the right-hand side, we saw this man. Maybe there is meant to be some allusion to where Jesus had been moved or eventually would move to the right hand of the Father, but to me this just reads like Mark telling us what the women had told him or had told Peter, and they just are reporting what they saw. At any rate, his speech to them, beginning in verse 6, is, as angels always introduce themselves, calm down. Don't be afraid. I have good news to give you. But it's interesting what he does, how he speaks to them, I guess. We notice what he's directing the women towards. And this, I guess, differs in a lot of ways from, some of the more mysterious and more kind of, far-fetched, frankly, but, the more fantastical elements of maybe in other religions or maybe in other apocryphal gospels that would circulate after this, where he might tell them to go and go to a certain place and you'll have a vision there, and then some other thing might happen, or you're going to have some spiritual experience, and you turn around 3 times and then go to sleep, and then this thing will happen, or whatever it is. But we notice that he directs them to very tangible things and very pertinent things. So he's first of all talking about Jesus of Nazareth. This is the same person that they're seeking. A critical idea here is that he's speaking of Jesus in the present tense, and he's using his name. He's using a personal name to talk about the person that they knew as they knew him. Yes, he's been changed. Yes, we understand he's resurrected, and because this is the Son of God come back from the dead, that does change things, certainly, but allowing for that. In many ways, in many substantive ways, in a concrete way, it's the man they knew. It's Jesus of Nazareth. It's not some new being. It's not of a completely different state that they will find him in. He says to them, you came looking for Jesus, and I'm telling you where he is. You can find him. You will be able to see him again, or he will find you, maybe more accurately, but he's not here, but I can tell you where he is. But it's this individual, it's this identity that they are looking for. He directs them to Jesus himself. But he also does this with physical places. First of all, in the tomb itself, he says, here's exactly where he was, and they've seen this, they know this. He's directing them to an agreed-upon historical fact that they can validate. He was here. You agree to that. We know that. That's the last place we saw him, and the stone was put in front of him. But he's not here anymore. However, again, there is an actual actual, tangible, flesh and blood place that exists on this earth, in our plane of existence, where you can find him. Go to Galilee and he'll meet you there. Again, not some esoteric mystery secret that they are going to be indoctrinated into. You go to this place and you will see this person. It anchors everything in reality. It pulls everything down to a very ground level, a very understandable level, and just reports things as they are, as Mark has been doing habitually throughout his gospel. Removing any weird element, removing any, frankly, any kind of mystery from it. It's just reported in the simplest terms. Jesus died, he was buried, he's not here anymore. His risen self will appear to you later on. And we have to note here, of course, what a blessing this is, I guess. This first command and this first speech to the women afterward, and what they will be commanded to go and say to the disciples as well. The first communication from God to people who loved him after Jesus is raised is not blame, is not, okay, I'm glad you're here. Go tell Peter, I told you so. I told you you were going to blow it and you were going to deny me. And you said, nuh-uh. And I said, uh-huh. Who was right? Go tell James and John. You guys were the sons of thunder. You guys are saying, oh, we can drink the cup. We can go through whatever you go through. We're willing to die with you. And you ran off into the night. Go tell those 11 men who are left, you failed me. You left me. You abandoned me. I went through all of this alone, and where were you? That isn't what the angel says for the women to go and tell these disciples. He brings a word of encouragement, not blame. He's going before you into Galilee. There you will see him, as he said to you. For that to be God's first word to them afterward. There you'll see him. What you've been hoping for, or afraid to hope for, or whatever the case might be, that's going to happen. You think of death. You think of the thoughts that go through our minds with death. The death of a loved one, the unexpected loss, or I mean, in this way, it's unthinkable what they've experienced with Jesus' death. A murder, a violent loss. But you think of what we feel in those immediate hours and days afterward. What do you want from that person who has departed? You want to be able to see them again. You want to be able to talk to them again. You want to be with them once more. You miss them. Especially with Christians, we understand this most because we say, we don't sorrow as the rest of the world does. We intend to see them again. But what hurts right now, what makes it loss, is that we can't right this second. And that's what we want to be able to do. That's what the angel's telling him. You'll see him again. That thing that you want in the moment of loss, you'll have very soon. And here's where you can find that. This is fully in keeping with, but another great reminder of the mercy of God, his kindness, his patience, his love, his grace towards us. And we see it displayed with these folks here. In verse 6, and there's kind of a light rebuke of the women before we run too far ahead into the next few verses. When he talks in verse 6 about you seeking Jesus of Nazareth, as I said, there is a bit of maybe a light rebuke in there. That seeking, Mark has used constantly in his gospel, maybe a dozen times, at least 10. But that seeking or looking for Jesus in particular, we've seen him use multiple times throughout his gospel, and it's never good. It's never really in a positive sense. It's either people who are trying to find Jesus so that they might exploit him or so that they might find something against him, or they might arrest him, or they might harm him. They're looking for him. They're hunting for him, really, is maybe the better way to look at it in that sense. Or they're looking for him out of ignorance. They don't know where he is, or they don't know what he's up to, or they kind of don't have any clue what's going on. They're just sort of looking around for Jesus. It's not really an earnest seeking, like maybe when Paul talks about looking for and hastening his coming, where it's this hopeful looking forward and you're awaiting something and you're hastening the day. That's Mark never uses the idea of looking for in that way. And so when the angel says to these women, you're looking for Jesus of Nazareth, I think he's playing on that ignorance there, that you're looking in the wrong place. You don't even, you're here, and maybe you think you know what you're doing here, but you really don't. There's no reason for you to be here, because Jesus is not in this place anymore. And so they have found this empty place. He is not here. See the place where they laid him, and you see, of course, his absence from it. We speak a lot of the empty tomb, and rightly so. And Peter would, in Acts chapter 2, the kind of seminal preaching of the gospel, would draw on the idea that you can go to David's tomb, you can see where David's bones were laid, you can find remains of a lot of people who have left us, and you can't do that with Jesus. There's no body that anyone can produce. Well, we have to say, that alone, of course, isn't necessarily proof of anything. The story that Matthew 28 tells, that was fed out to the people through the Roman soldiers, I don't believe that happened. But if we're being fair, you have to allow for the possibility of it at least. You could say, if someone wanted to steal a body, that would be one way a tomb could be empty. In this case, it would be improbable, of course. You'd have to get past Roman soldiers. You'd have to get the sealed stone out of the way. You'd have to get his body out of there. You'd have to put the stone back. You'd have to keep the soldiers asleep the whole time. You'd have to find somewhere else to put it without anyone else detecting you. It's not likely. But you'd have to say, well, okay, it could have. Just the fact that a body isn't there doesn't necessarily prove anything. And so biblically, it's used as just a part. It's a part of the array of evidence. It's a part of the tapestry of evidence that shows that this is what happened. His appearances afterward will play into that. Again, the unlikelihood or the illogical nature of anything else having happened will play into that. There will be several different things that are offered as further proof. But the empty tomb is compelling. It is compelling to be able to say, here's the place that was one thing, and now it is not that thing. It's not a tomb anymore. It's just a cave. It's just a place with no body. But we see, again, Jesus speaking, or God, rather, through his angel, speaking with comfort to the people who have come to the empty tomb. It's interesting, of course, that in their speech here in verses 6 and 7, Jesus has already gone. He's already begun to act. He's already planned to act without seeing their response. They did not really need to agree to whatever else might happen next. They did not need to be a part of the planning phase. They did not need to be on board with this. We're seeing yet another idea right here from the very beginning that God is in control of this event and everything that will happen from it. The body has been removed because God raised it. The stone has been rolled away because God moved it. The church will begin because God will start it. The gospel will be preached because God will send men to do it. All these things that starting now and moving forward happen, and Acts, of course, is the wonderful record of this, is God's plan, God's program for his church, his people after resurrection, and he will accomplish that one way or another. So here they are simply reporting what has happened, not, if you'd like to. If you're cool with it, you can go meet Jesus in Galilee, and we'll, that's an opportunity for us here. No. He's there. He's gone. You go there and see him. Okay, that's what we will do. In the same fashion that when all of this begins, back in Mark chapter 1, Jesus calls 4 fishermen. He says, come follow me. And when the king speaks, you obey. You listen to him. Come follow me. They come follow him. He's speaking with this same authority here in the end of the gospel, which is very fitting, of course. Comments, questions, I've talked quite a bit. Anything up through verse 7 or so here in Mark 16. Yeah, Jeffrey.
I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly, but I think I read somewhere that Jesus went to hell and defeated death and then brought everyone from hell into heaven.
Peter talks about in 1 Peter, he uses the language of Jesus going and preaching to the spirits which are in prison. And that has, I think, been mythologized maybe into the idea of going to hell. He was in the grave. He was in Sheol. He was in the place where dead are. And I guess it's a matter of more debate what exactly was taking place there, what exactly he was up to. But I do think, personally, I think from Peter's discussion of that in 1 Peter 3, there was a proclamation of some sort that Jesus made to all of the souls who occupy that place. I think he is proclaiming his victory and then ascending from that place on his own, of course. But yeah, good question. Nathan.
Resurrection, obviously he defeats death for himself, but he also defeats death for all of us as well.
Yeah.
And we get to share in that victory. And Mark has, I think, stressed along the way that we don't enter the kingdom of heaven through our own efforts, right? My virtue, my good deeds. Isaiah, he calls their righteousness as filthy rags, right? Basically, Jesus makes the impossible possible. We get to enter the kingdom because he is our champion who's gone ahead of us.
Yeah.
He did what we could do. He did that. And he basically guarantees our eternal future.
Thank you.
He guarantees our eternal future. This is in essence like the gospel message, what Jesus did on our behalf. And this is the thing that we should be shouting out to all those people around us.
Yeah, this victory claimed on our behalf by the only one who could do it. But you're absolutely right. Mark has taken great pains throughout the first 15 chapters to show us that this means something for us. It is connected to our fate. It is connected to our destiny. And it is the only way that we reach a similar end. Without this, I can't go to my grave, to my tomb, and expect my stone to miraculously be removed and my body to not be there when my loved ones come to look. The only hope of resurrection of life is through Jesus, specifically through our faith and through our following of Jesus. Mark has written that in large letters all throughout the first 15 chapters. But yeah, very good reminder. This is the heart of the gospel message. The victory over death, his assumption of all power and all authority. And that's the point we're leading up to. Yeah. Steve.
Could you comment on about the different gospels have different accounts of this event? Some of them show that there's one angel, some of them say there's two angels.
Yeah.
Different people, one of them guards witnessed the opening of the tomb by the angel.
Yeah.
Why do you have all those different accounts?
There is, I'll say kind of as a preliminary, it is possible, and I'll allow, not without difficulty, I guess, but it is possible to harmonize those into a cohesive whole that would kind of here in hour one, this happens, and then the next step is this, and to kind of put those into a chronology that would show everything in a way that respects the details given by one without contradicting the other, and weaving them all together into one. As I said, not without difficulty, because you do have presented very, very different angles and very different purposes, of course, for which details are given. Some of them are more material than others, I guess. Most of them kind of just would be a discrepancy in order of event, which is given, which I don't think for an original writer or reader is of tremendous importance. They're going to order things in the way that makes the most thematic sense and get across the primary details oftentimes with little regard for that. An idea like there being one angel or two, oftentimes we see this idea in the Gospels, and Mark and Matthew have a lot of interplay with that as well. Maybe we drop one person out because he didn't say anything. There were two men there and only one of them talked, and so I might say, a guy said to me, a guy was there and he said to me this. Another person might record, well, there were two men and, they or he said this. That isn't putting things in conflict with each other, really. It's just a different way of reporting the same facts. So, apologies if this is not an in-depth or not a ultimately satisfying answer. And maybe next week we could look at, maybe spend a few minutes really kind of trying to weave all of that together. But there are ways of ultimately harmonizing all this that happens. We just see it presented in a different form because these men are each trying to accomplish a different end. Maybe you have a gospel like John's, who, writing 40 years later, 50 years almost after Mark's gospel, decides to say, we have 3 different tries that have been made at this, and those were all good, and yet I also remember some things that I think would be helpful for us to get in writing here, to look at things from a different angle. And so you just have those different presentations of it that are given. But the key details of the account are going to remain the same throughout. You have people coming to examine something that they expect to see and find out that that's not there. There is no body in this tomb. That essential detail remains the same. Anything else to add on to that, or other comments there? David?
Just from Mark's perspective, and as you pointed out before, again, this focus is on this fear aspect.
Yeah.
Seems to be here.
Yeah.
That it's a fearful thing.
Sure.
That's happening. And it's fearful to these individuals. As we look through the book of Mark, all through the book of Mark, there's a fear factor involved.
Yes.
On all these events, including this one.
Yeah.
And that seems to be Mark's focus, is on fear.
It is a lot of times, and we can go ahead and mention that from verse 8. Isn't this a kind of, well, and I'll have a lot more to say about it, maybe not this morning, but it is a puzzling direction for things to go in verse 8, to kind of leave these women in this state, essentially. Here they are, they've been, and we talked about it a little bit a couple of weeks ago, the last time we met. The two things they seem to be told to do, don't be alarmed or don't be afraid, and go talk to the disciples. Go say something. And so verse 8 tells us they remained afraid and they didn't tell anyone anything. So I want you to do this and don't do this, and they don't do that and do that. They kind of do the opposite of what they've just been told. Kind of a puzzling reaction. again, we're conditioned to think of them in a good light, and I have nothing bad to say about these women, of course. They're showing tremendous faith. In many ways, they're exemplary, but it's not an altogether positive picture that we're being shown there. Furthermore, as David points out, this fear, a common idea, a common theme in Mark, and it's really never shown in a positive light. It isn't the kind of fear of God that we tend to think of and maybe associate with wisdom literature or something like that, the beginning of wisdom and the need for reverence for God, and Jesus saying, fear him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. A lot of times, the fear that we see in Mark is an impediment to faith, is something that gets in the way, is something that keeps people from coming close to him or from understanding fully who he is. It's a danger. It's kind of a negative thing. It's a barrier. And yet we see this is the response that we're kind of left with in verse 8. They said nothing to anyone, and they're afraid. They remain in this fearful state for now, at least. And we see a reversal of the problem that we had so much early on in Mark's gospel. What happens every time Jesus heals someone in the opening chapters? He tells them, don't tell anybody. What do most of them do? They go tell somebody. Yeah, immediately they go and start telling the whole village or whatever it might be. We're going to spread this news around after he's trying to say, don't talk about this yet. The hour's not come. Now, opposite. Go tell the disciples this. And they won't speak. They won't do it. They won't say what they're supposed to say. Opposite problem for what we had. This is, again, it's kind of a negative. This kind of leaves us with a problem that we have with the response that the women have. Now, presumably this is resolved in the rest of Mark's gospel. This is resolved when we see how he's ultimately going to move the narrative along and tell us what happens with the women, what they might do, what might come of what they have done. But right now, for verse 8, it's leaving us with a little bit of lingering tension that he's been raised. He's accomplished what he came to accomplish. He has been recognized by the centurion as the Son of God, and yet maybe we're still not where we fully need to be. Karina?
I have a little bit different take on it.
Sure.
So from Mark and Luke, all of the accounts, they do have fear. They come in and they go, where is the body? What is going on? And there's this weird guy sitting here, right? They get that sense that this guy is more than, right, maybe he is. But with that fear, when someone's freaking out about something and they're stressed, if someone wants to bring them back to reality, they say, hold on, stop and think.
Mhm.
Like, take the fear out. And that's what the angel does here. He says, remember how he told you. And he's going to be here.
Yeah.
And all the things, and they stop and they go, it says literally, they stopped and they said, they remembered his words. So they calmed down and they came back to reality. And in Luke, it says that they went back to the 11 and all of the rest and told it, right? I mean, so maybe not spreading it and running down the room and saying the whole thing, but I'm conglomerative of what we see in the New Testament with Christ. He always tells us, okay, do this, have this. And so you put that, okay, I'm convicted.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he always says, but remember.
Yeah.
I love you. Remember, come back to me. So the fear factor comes with the overall arching of, hold on, look at the facts, and there's always love surrounding, and there's a reason that there is that.
Yeah.
So the fear is that we all have is was offset
Yes.
by love.
Well, and overcome. And that's kind of ultimately the point I'm getting at. If we're left there at verse 8, that's difficult to deal with. That's difficult for the risen Christ to be met with fear as the final word, as the end of it. I'm afraid, I'm troubled, I'm alarmed by what I've seen, and I'm not really processing. I'm not really doing with that what I need to do with it yet. That's where things stop in verse 8. Thankfully, as we know, and as we'll see elsewhere, and as we'll see later, that isn't where things stop. They do remember, they do call to mind, they do ultimately go and tell, they do ultimately hear and listen and believe, they do ultimately see and feel and come to the full realization of what's going on, and then that fear is dispelled. But it is a barrier when it remains. So we'll have to find out how to overcome that. We'll need to do it next week, though, because we've run out of time. Thank you all so much, as always. Really appreciate your time, your comments, questions.